Okay, so in this video I'm going to show you how to use Carbide Create. So this is our 2D CAM software that we use with our CNC router. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go over into the top left here and click on Setup. So now this is where we set up most of the operations in here. So our stock size doesn't really matter as long as it's larger than the cutting area that we have for our design. So 20 inches by 10 inches should be fine. Stock thickness, this is really important. So you want to make sure that your stock thickness is exactly the correct thickness or less if you don't plan on going all the way through. Because if this is thicker in here than your actual stock thickness, then you'll cut through and cut into our table. Another important setting is the zero height. So we want our zero location to be at this red dot here at the top of our piece and not at the bottom, because it just makes it easier when we go into editing the toolpaths later. And now, so the toolpath is 0, so this is the location where you're going to zero the end mill onto your stock. So in our case, it's generally easier just to leave it in the lower left corner, as you can see with the red dot at the bottom left here. So now the material, so we're using MDF, so it's a softwood. Machine is the Shapeoko 4. Track type, 1/2 inch is fine, and we can keep the units in inches. Now, also in the Setup tab, just some things to note. So you have a place where you can make notes for the file if you want. And since all of this here is snap to grid, you can actually change the grid spacing. So to help with design orientation. And you can also import any DXF, SVG file, any of those files that are vector art drawings that you would use for the laser cutter, you can also import into here if you don't want to make your own design. But in our case, it's so simple. So I want a rectangle to be cut all the way out, and in that rectangle, I want a pocket with GT in it. So to start making the rectangle, let's just say we want the width to be 10 inches, height to be 5 inches, and now the corners you can actually set if you want square, fillet, chamfer, but an important one specific to CNC routing technique, it's called dog bone for the corners. So let's say you had like a rectangular block to perfectly fit on the inside of here. So the diameter of the end mill will cause the inside corner, like let's say this is set to square. If you were to mill through on the inside here, then there's going to be a radius, a small radius on the corner that'll prevent your rectangular piece from fitting in perfectly. So what you can do is you can set it to dog bone. That way it leaves plenty of room in the cutout so that you can fit a rectangular piece into that corner with enough space. But for our purposes, I'm just going to set it to fillet, radius of 1/4 inch, just to make the operation faster, which we'll go over later. Okay, I'm going to move it a little bit away from the corner. Now let's make the GT. See if I can move it over. Let's see. GT. Let's say font height 4 inches is fine. Press done. Now let's move it over here. But now I want to try to get it centered in my block. So what you can do is you can select both of these by holding down Shift. And now you can see the transform. And in here it says align vectors, align centers, and now these are perfectly aligned to each other, so I can click off. So now the design's looking good, but something specific to CNC routing, I plan to go all the way through to cut this outer shape out of our stock, and once it starts to cut all the way through as it's going around with the CNC router, less and less material will be holding this rectangle onto your stock, and once it gets towards the end, if it rips off and it's just loose inside of your stock material, it's going to vibrate and cause all sorts of problems. So what we do instead is if you plan on doing any cuts all the way through to completely isolate this centerpiece from your stock, then you have to add tabs. So if I just go back here, so I'm clicking on the outer rectangle, edit, and then edit tabs, and then you only need about 1 or 2, And I like to place those around the outside here. And these are areas where it'll cut the stock very far down, but won't cut all the way through. That way you have something holding your piece in place, and you could just score it with an X-Acto knife later and sand them away. And just something to note with tabs, something to keep in mind, you don't really want to put a tab on a curved surface, because then it's hard to make that curved geometry perfect when you're sanding, versus if you put it on a straight flat surface and then you just sand down until it's perfectly flat. So now I have all my tabs, I'll press OK, and now that we have our design, we'll go into the actual toolpaths. So if we go into the toolpaths tab, so there's different types of toolpaths. So contour to cut things out, pocket, it's pretty self-explanatory, make a pocket into the material, texture for texture, V-carved is used for the V end mills that we talked about before, as well as advanced V-carve, and those are the main important ones. So just to cut this outer rectangle all the way down, I'm going to use a contour. So use current selection, and now this is important. You want to make sure you specify the right tool that's in your CNC router. So we installed a different one. So if you go into here, now we want Shapayoko, softwood, end mills, and we're using the 201 1/4" end mill. And here's all the information for it here. Press OK, press OK again, and now the tool has been updated. So our start depth is going to be the top of our stock. So use stock top is useful because this is where our 0 is. And then max depth, we want to use the stock bottom to cut all the way through. So now the offset direction is where you want the toolpath to actually cut. So I want to keep my dimensions, so I'm going to go to the outside right, and you can see that blue line changed. So the orange is the vector that we drew, and this blue is the actual tool path that it's going to take to cut it out. And now tabs, so this is settings for the tab. So width, height, I think 0.1 will be a little bit better, so it's easier to take off. Press OK. And then you can see here, toolpath will be about 2 minutes. And now for the GT, I want a pocket. So we'll do a similar type of thing. So I clicked on the GT, pocket, use current selection. Now the tool will stay with the 201 end mill. Start depth, use stock top. And let's just go 0.1 inches deep. Press OK. And now you can see the tool paths have also generated here for this. And if you want to look at it, so we can simulate MDF, show simulation. And now you can see that there's the cutout. And here are our tabs. But you can see on this side that we're a little too close to the end of our piece. So this tab is just floating and not really doing anything. So what we can just do is go back into design, grab all of these and shift them over a little bit. And what we want to do is make sure that we don't have our design right on the corner where our 0 is, because we have to remember we're also going to have work holdings that are going to be up a little bit onto our stock. So we don't want to use the very edge of our stock for that purpose. So now that I moved it in a little bit, we'll go back to toolpaths, show simulation, and that looks good. So now we would just save this file and then open it up in Carbide Motion once we're ready to actually use it.